The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of London as William adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. The gold buttons gleamed against the deep navy fabric, each one polished to perfection by the palace staff who had been preparing for this day for months. His hands trembled slightly as he straightened the medals across his chest, each one telling a story of service, duty, and sacrifice that had led him to this moment. Catherine stood beside him in the grand dressing room, her reflection multiplied, in the ornate mirrors that lined the walls. The ivory silk gown she wore had been crafted by the finest seamstresses in the kingdom, its intricate beadwork catching the light with every subtle movement. Her eyes met his in the mirror, and without words, they shared the weight of what lay ahead. This was not just another royal ceremony. This was the moment their lives would change forever. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The question carried more meaning than its simple words suggested. Ready for the crown? Ready for the responsibility? Ready for a lifetime of service to a nation that would watch their every move? William nodded, though his heart raced beneath his composed exterior. Outside, the streets buzzed with anticipation. Thousands of people had traveled from across the Commonwealth and beyond, camping overnight to secure the best viewing spots along the processional route. The energy was electric, a mixture of celebration and solemnity that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the palace. Their children's voices echoed from the adjoining room where nannies helped them prepare for their first major royal ceremony. George, now old enough to understand the significance of the day, had asked countless questions about what would happen. Charlotte bounced with excitement, her natural charm already evident as she practiced her curtsy for the 100th time. Louis, still young enough to find wonder in the pageantry, marveled at his miniature formal wear. The family had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Protocol lessons, rehearsals, and countless fittings had filled their days. But nothing could truly prepare them for the emotional weight of inheriting a 1,000-year tradition. William's thoughts drifted to his grandmother, the late Queen, whose steady presence had guided the monarchy through decades of change. Her passing had been the catalyst for this day, and her absence felt profound. A gentle knock interrupted his reverie. An equerry appeared at the door, impeccably dressed and bearing the kind of practiced calm that came from years of managing royal events. "Your Royal Highness, the carriages are ready. The procession will begin in 30 minutes. The words hung in the air like a starting gun. This was it. No more preparation, no more rehearsals. The centuries-old machinery of a coronation was already in motion, and they were now part of its inexorable progress toward Westminster Abbey. Catherine gathered her children, her maternal instincts taking over as she ensured each child looked perfect. She smoothed George's collar, adjusted Charlotte's tiara, and whispered words of encouragement to Louis. The family unit that had been shaped in relative privacy was about to step into the full glare of global attention. As they made their way through the palace corridors, staff members lined the walls. Some had served the royal family for decades, others were new to their roles, but all understood the historic nature of this moment. Quiet applause followed their progress, a recognition of the magnitude of the day and the grace with which the family carried themselves. The palace doors opened to reveal the golden state carriage, its elaborate decorations gleaming in the morning light. 8 magnificent horses stood ready, their ceremonial harnesses polished to perfection. The coachmen, dressed in scarlet and gold livery, maintained their stoic expressions despite the significance of their role in history. The streets beyond were lined with barriers that could barely contain the crowds. Union Jack flags fluttered from every available surface, and the air filled with the sound of thousands of voices raised in celebration. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, elderly couples shared folding chairs they had brought from home, and tourists from around the world held cameras aloft, desperate to capture this once-in-a-lifetime moment. William helped Catherine into the carriage, his movements careful and deliberate. The children followed, their eyes wide with wonder at the spectacle unfolding around them. As the family settled into their seats, the weight of tradition seemed to settle around them like a cloak. They were no longer just a family preparing for a ceremony. They were symbols of continuity, representatives of a nation's hopes and dreams. The carriage began to move with a gentle lurch, and the crowds erupted in cheers. Thousands of voices joined together in celebration, creating a wall of sound that seemed to lift the very carriage off the ground. William waved to the crowds, his trained smile masking the tumultuous emotions within. Pride mixed with apprehension, joy mingled with sorrow for the losses that had brought them to this moment. Catherine maintained her composure with the grace that had made her beloved by the public. Her waves were perfectly timed, her smile genuine despite the overwhelming nature of the attention. She understood that this moment belonged not just to their family, but to everyone who had gathered to witness history. The processional route took them through the heart of London, past landmarks that had witnessed countless royal ceremonies over the centuries. Each turn revealed new crowds, new faces filled with excitement and expectation. The children pressed their faces to the carriage windows, marveling at the sea of people who had come to celebrate their father's coronation. As Westminster Abbey came into view, its ancient spires reaching toward the clouded sky, the full weight of the moment began to settle on William's shoulders. Inside those hallowed walls, he would be transformed from prince to king, taking on responsibilities that would define the rest of his life. The coronation was not just a ceremony, but a sacred covenant between ruler and nation, a promise to serve that would endure until his final breath. The ancient doors of Westminster Abbey stood open like the mouth of history itself, ready to swallow the royal family into its sacred embrace. As their carriage drew closer, William could see the red carpet that had been rolled out from the street. To the altar, a crimson river that would carry him toward his destiny. The Abbey's bells had been ringing since dawn, their bronze voices echoing across London in a symphony that announced the approaching ceremony. Thousands of dignitaries had already taken their places inside the Abbey, kings and queens from around. The world sat alongside prime ministers, presidents, and religious leaders. The guest list read like a directory of global power, each invitation carefully considered and precisely placed according to protocols that had been refined over centuries. Yet despite the grandeur of the gathering, William knew that the most important witnesses were not the crowned heads of Europe, but the ordinary citizens who lined the streets outside. As the carriage came to a final stop, a hush fell over the immediate vicinity. The crowds could sense that the most crucial moment was approaching. William took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the St. Edward's crown that would soon rest upon his head. The crown, crafted for Charles II in 1661, had crowned every monarch, since its golden arches and precious stones carrying the accumulated authority of generations. Catherine stepped from the carriage first, her movements fluid and graceful despite the restrictive nature of her ceremonial gown. The train of her dress cascaded behind her like a waterfall of silk and lace, requiring the assistance of pages who had practiced this choreography dozens of times. Her composure was remarkable, betraying none of the nerves that surely churned. Beneath her poised exterior, the children followed, each one representing the future of the monarchy. George, as the heir apparent, walked with a solemnity that seemed beyond his years. He had been coached extensively on the protocol, understanding that his behavior would be scrutinized by millions of viewers around the world. Charlotte moved, with natural elegance, her youth allowing her to find joy in the pageantry without fully grasping its profound significance. Louis, still small enough to be overwhelmed by the grandeur, stayed close to his mother's side. As William emerged from the carriage, the crowds erupted once more. The sound was deafening, a roar of approval and celebration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ancient building. He paused for a moment, looking up at the Abbey's Gothic facade, its stone saints and angels watching over the proceedings, with eternal vigilance. How many of his ancestors had stood in this exact spot, feeling the same mixture of honor and trepidation? The Archbishop of Canterbury appeared at the Abbey entrance, his ceremonial robes brilliant white against the dark stone of the building. His presence marked the beginning of the sacred portion of the ceremony, the moment when pageantry would give way to solemn ritual. The Archbishop's face bore the gravity appropriate to the occasion, understanding his role as the conduit between the earthly crown and divine authority. Inside the Abbey, the congregation rose as one when the royal family appeared. The sound of 2,000 people standing in unison created a rustling wave that traveled from the entrance to the altar. The stained glass windows cast rainbow patterns across the ancient stones, as if heaven itself was blessing the proceedings with colored light. The procession began slowly, each step measured and deliberate. William walked behind the cross and candles that led the way, following a path that had been trodden by monarchs for nearly 1,000 years. His footsteps echoed in the vast space, mingling with the organ music that swelled from the choir loft. The music was specially composed for the occasion, blending traditional hymns with contemporary arrangements that reflected the modern monarchy he would lead. Catherine walked behind him, accompanied by her own procession of ladies-in-waiting and pages. Her train required careful management as it flowed down the Abbey's center aisle, its intricate embroidery telling the story of the Commonwealth nations through carefully crafted symbols and patterns. Each stitch represented hours of meticulous work by craftspeople who understood they were creating a piece of living history. The children found their designated seats in the front row, their small forms dwarfed by the grandeur surrounding them. Palace staff had prepared them for the length and complexity of the ceremony, but nothing could truly prepare young minds for the overwhelming nature of such an event. Their presence added a human element to the ancient ritual, reminding observers that beneath the crown and regalia was a father who had sung lullabies and helped with homework. As William approached the altar, the weight of history seemed to compress around him. This was where his parents had been married, where his grandmother had been crowned decades earlier, where centuries of British history had been marked by moments of profound significance. The altar itself seemed to pulse with the accumulated energy of countless prayers, blessings, and sacred moments. The Archbishop's voice filled the Abbey as he began the opening prayers. The words were ancient, their meaning polished by repetition across the centuries, yet they felt fresh and immediate, as if spoken for the first time. The congregation responded in unison, their voices joining together in affirmations that had been spoken by their ancestors and would be spoken by their descendants. William knelt before the altar, his head bowed in preparation for the sacred oil that would anoint him as king. The ampulla, a golden eagle that had contained holy oil for coronation since the 14th century, waited nearby. The oil itself was a special blend, its recipe known only to a select few, its symbolism connecting the earthly ceremony to divine authority. The moment of anointing approached, and with it, the irreversible transformation from prince to king. There would be no going back after this moment, no return to the relative privacy of his former life. The crown would mark him forever, making him both the most powerful and the most constrained person in the kingdom. Outside the Abbey, the crowds waited in respectful silence, understanding that the most sacred portions of the ceremony were taking place beyond their view. Television cameras captured every moment for the billions watching around the world. But the most profound transformation was happening in the quiet space between William's bowed head and the Archbishop's blessed hands. This was where a man became a symbol, where a father became a king, where the future began. The holy oil touched William's forehead with the gentleness of a whisper, yet its significance thundered through the abbey like cannon fire. The archbishop's hands moved with practiced precision, marking the sign of the cross as he had done in countless services, but never with such momentous consequence. This single drop of consecrated oil carried the weight of divine appointment, transforming a prince into a king through ritual that predated the stones of the abbey itself. William felt the cool touch of the oil as it traced ancient patterns on his skin. The sensation was surprisingly subtle for such a profound moment, like the gentle brush of destiny itself. Around him, the abbey held its collective breath. 2,000 pairs of eyes focused on this most sacred instant. Even the children in the front row seemed to understand the gravity of what was happening, their usual restlessness replaced by an instinctive reverence. The prayers continued in Latin, the ancient language lending additional solemnity to words that had been spoken over monarchs for centuries. William found himself thinking of his grandmother, remembering her own coronation that he had watched countless times in archival footage. She had been so young then, barely older than he was now, carrying the same mixture of determination and uncertainty that he felt in this moment. Catherine watched from her seat, her hands folded in perfect composure despite the emotional storm she felt within. She was witnessing her husband's transformation into something larger than himself, something that would forever change their family dynamic. The man she had married was disappearing into the role of king, and while she had always known this, day would come. The reality was more overwhelming than she had anticipated. The regalia began to appear, each piece carried forward by carefully chosen participants who understood the honor of their roles. The sovereign's orb came first, its golden surface adorned with a cross that symbolized the Christian world under the monarch's protection. The archbishop placed it in William's right hand, its weight surprising him with its solid reality. This was no mere symbol, but a working tool of monarchy, crafted to be held and carried as a reminder of responsibility. Next came the scepter, its length topped with the magnificent Cullinan diamond that had been cut from the largest rough diamond ever found. As it settled into William's left hand, he felt the balance of power it represented, the delicate equilibrium between authority and service that would define his reign. The scepter had been held by every monarch since Charles II, its golden shaft, worn smooth by royal hands across the centuries. The moment everyone had been waiting for approached as the St. Edward's crown was lifted from its velvet cushion. The crown seemed to glow with its own light, the gold catching and reflecting the illumination from the abbey's chandeliers. Its arches reached upward like prayers made manifest, supporting a world that would soon rest upon William's head. The crown was heavier than he had expected during rehearsals, its 5 pounds of gold and precious stones carrying not just physical weight but the accumulated burden of kingship. The archbishop raised the crown high above William's head, pausing, for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. In that suspended instant, William was both prince and king, existing in the liminal space between what he had been and what he was about to become. The abbey fell completely silent, as if the very building held its breath for this transformative moment. Then, with movements slow and deliberate, the crown descended. It settled onto William's head with surprising gentleness, its velvet lining cushioning the gold against his scalp. The fit was perfect, adjusted through countless fittings to rest comfortably despite its great weight. As the crown touched his head, a visible transformation occurred. His posture straightened, his expression grew more composed, and something indefinable in his bearing changed forever. The moment the crown settled completely, the abbey erupted in coordinated celebration. "God save the king!" rang out from 2,000 voices, the ancient acclamation given new life and meaning. The organ swelled in triumphant chords that seemed to lift the roof itself, while the choir's voices soared in harmonies that had announced new reigns for generations. Outside the abbey, the crowds had been waiting for this precise moment. The Television broadcasts had allowed them to follow the ceremony, and as the crown was placed, their cheers created a wave of sound that rolled across London. From the Abbey steps to Buckingham Palace, from Parliament Square to the Thames, the city erupted in celebration of its new king. Church bells across the Commonwealth began to ring in carefully orchestrated succession. First London's churches, then those across Britain, followed by bells in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and every corner of the realm. The sound created a chain of celebration that circled the globe, each bell adding its voice to a symphony of royal recognition that transcended borders and time zones. William sat in the coronation chair, the same seat that had held monarchs since 1308, its ancient wood carved with the graffiti of centuries past. Visitors to the Abbey had left their marks on the chair during times when it was more accessible, creating an informal record of British history alongside the formal ceremony it supported. The stone of Scone rested beneath the seat, its presence, connecting this English ceremony to Scottish traditions and the complex unity of the United Kingdom. Catherine was called forward for her own moment of recognition. As Queen Consort, she would receive her own crown, though in a ceremony that was complementary rather than equal to her husband's coronation. Her crown was smaller but no less magnificent, its design created specifically for this occasion and incorporating diamonds from Queen Elizabeth's personal collection. As it was placed upon her head, she became not just William's wife but a queen in her own right, with duties and responsibilities that would span the remainder of her life. The children watched their parents' transformation with wide eyes, seeing their father and mother elevated to roles that they themselves might one day inherit. George, as the direct heir, paid particular attention to every detail, understanding that he was witnessing ceremonies he might someday experience himself. Charlotte and Louis found wonder in the pageantry, their young minds processing the magnitude of the moment in their own ways. The investiture continued with the presentation of additional regalia, each piece carrying its own history and symbolism. The ring that would never leave William's finger, representing his marriage to the nation. The gloves that symbolized the pure handling of sacred duties. The spurs that connected the ceremony to medieval traditions of knighthood and service. As each element was added, William felt the full weight of kingship settling around him like armor made of responsibility and tradition. The final elements of the coronation ceremony unfolded with the precision of a masterpiece painted over centuries. William, now crowned and invested with the full regalia of kingship, prepared for the moment of homage that would seal his transformation from heir to sovereign. The Archbishop of Canterbury knelt before him first, placing his hands between the king's palms in the ancient gesture of feudal loyalty, speaking words that had bound church and crown since medieval times. The homage ceremony carried profound meaning beyond its ceremonial beauty. Each person who knelt before William was acknowledging not just his personal authority, but his role as the living symbol of the nation itself. The Archbishop's words echoed through the Abbey, promising faithful service and counsel, binding the spiritual and temporal powers together in a partnership that had weathered centuries of change and challenge. Prince Charles, William's father, approached next to pay homage to his son. The moment carried extraordinary emotional weight as a father knelt before his child, not in submission to William the man, but in recognition of William the king. Charles had waited his entire life for his own coronation, and now he witnessed his son receiving the crown that had been destined for him. His voice was steady as he spoke the traditional words, but observers could see the mixture of pride and poignancy in his eyes. The other members of the royal family followed in carefully ordered succession, each homage representing a different branch of the family tree that stretched back through centuries of British history. Uncles, cousins, and relatives, whose titles connected them to forgotten kingdoms and ancient duchies, all paid their respects to the new monarch. Their presence created a living link between the modern ceremony and the medieval traditions, from which it had evolved. Catherine watched this parade of reverence with growing understanding of how completely their lives had changed. Every person who knelt before her husband was acknowledging that their marriage had transformed her from a commoner into a queen, their children from ordinary youngsters into heirs to the throne. The weight of this recognition was both thrilling and terrifying, knowing that from this moment forward, every action, every word, every public appearance would carry implications far beyond their personal lives. The congregation's voices rose. In the final hymn of the coronation service, "All People That on Earth Do Dwell," its familiar melody carrying special significance on this historic day. The words seemed to gain new meaning as they filled the Abbey, connecting the ceremony to the millions of people watching around the world. The hymn's message of universal praise and thanksgiving reflected the Commonwealth's diversity while celebrating the unity that the monarchy represented. As the service moved toward its conclusion, William felt a profound shift in his consciousness. The weight of the crown had become familiar during the lengthy ceremony. But more than that, the weight of kingship itself had settled into his spirit. He was no longer the same man who had entered the Abbey that morning. The sacred oils, the ancient words, the ceremonial investiture had created something new. A king who carried within himself all the hopes, dreams, and expectations of his people. The recessional began with the same stately pace that had marked the entrance, but now everything was different. William walked as a crowned king, the regalia marking him as the living embodiment of 1,000 years of British history. The St. Edward's crown caught the light from the stained glass windows, creating brief flashes of brilliance that seemed to announce his transformed status to every corner of the ancient building. Catherine followed, her own crown marking her elevation to queen consort. The train of her dress seemed even more magnificent now, its symbolic patterns taking on new meaning as the garment of a crowned queen rather than a princess. The ladies-in-waiting who attended her moved with even greater precision, understanding that they were now serving not just a member of the royal family, but the Queen of England. The children joined the procession with renewed solemnity, their young minds processing the transformation they had witnessed. George walked with particular gravity, understanding that he had just watched his father become the man he himself might one day replace. Charlotte and Louis found their own ways to comprehend the magnitude of what had occurred, their natural resilience helping them adapt to their new status as children of the reigning monarch. The Abbey's great doors opened to reveal a transformed world outside. The crowds that had gathered before dawn were now greeting not a prince but a king, their cheers carrying a different quality of celebration and respect. The coronation had been televised around the world, creating a shared global experience that connected viewers from every continent in witness to this historic moment. The state coach waited in even greater splendor than before, its golden exterior seeming to glow with reflected glory from the newly crowned monarch it would carry. The horses stood ready, their ceremonial harnesses gleaming in the afternoon light that had replaced the morning's softer illumination. Even the coachmen seemed to sit straighter, understanding that they were now serving a king rather than a prince. As the royal family settled into the coach for their return journey, the transformation of their public roles became immediately apparent. The crowd's responses were more intense, more reverent, more emotionally charged than they had been during the morning procession. People waved with greater enthusiasm, called out with louder voices, and pressed closer to the barriers in hopes of catching a glimpse of their newly crowned sovereign. The processional route took them through streets that had been transformed by celebration. Bunting and banners decorated every available surface, while giant television screens had been erected to allow the crowds to follow the ceremony even when the royal party was out of sight. The atmosphere was electric with joy and national pride, creating an almost tangible energy that seemed to lift the very coach off the ground. William waved to his subjects with new understanding of what that relationship meant. These were no longer just people who admired his family or followed royal events with casual interest. They were his people, citizens of the realm over which he now ruled, individuals whose welfare and happiness had become his sacred responsibility. The weight of that realization was both humbling and inspiring. The children pressed their faces to the coach windows, marveling at the sea of celebration that surrounded them. For them, this would become the new normal, a life lived in the constant awareness of public attention and expectation. Their childhood would be shaped by this moment, their futures defined by the crown that now rested on their father's head. The return journey to Buckingham Palace became a triumph, unlike anything London had witnessed in decades. Every street corner revealed new crowds. Every vista showed fresh waves of celebration rippling through the capital city. The newly crowned King William gazed out at his subjects with eyes that saw everything differently now. The crown upon his head had transformed not just his status, but his very perception of the world around him. Children perched on their parents' shoulders waved small Union Jack flags with infectious enthusiasm, their innocent joy untainted by the complex political realities that the monarchy represented. Elderly couples sat in folding chairs they had brought from home, some wiping tears from their eyes as they witnessed a moment they had waited years to see. Veterans in their dress uniforms stood at attention as the coach passed, their salutes, sharp and proud, honoring not just the man, but the institution he now embodied. The international visitors who had traveled thousands of miles to witness the coronation added their own voices to the celebration. Tourist groups from Japan photographed every moment, while families from Canada and Australia felt a special connection to this moment of Commonwealth unity. The crown that now rested on William's head belonged not just to Britain, but to every corner of the realm where the royal cipher would soon appear on government buildings and official documents. Catherine found herself studying the faces in the crowd with new intensity, understanding that these people were now her people too. As queen consort, she would need to connect with citizens from every walk of life, from every region of the kingdom, from every level of society. The diversity of the crowd reflected the modern Britain she would help William serve, a nation far more complex and varied than the country over which his ancestors had ruled. The coach turned onto the Mall, that grand avenue that leads directly to Buckingham Palace, and the sight that greeted them took even the experienced royal family by surprise. The entire length of the mall was packed with people, a solid mass of humanity that stretched from Admiralty Arch to the palace gates. The red asphalt seemed to disappear beneath a sea of faces, flags, and celebration that created a tunnel of pure joy through which the royal coach traveled. The trees that lined the mall were filled with spectators who had climbed them for better views, their precarious positions testament to their determination to witness this historic moment. Police officers stood at regular intervals, but they too seemed caught up in the celebration, many of them smiling and waving along with the crowds they were meant to manage. Street vendors moved through the masses, selling commemorative items, their voices adding to the general din of celebration. Programs from the coronation service, miniature crowns for children, and flags bearing William's new royal cipher were exchanged for coins with the enthusiasm of a festival marketplace. The economic impact of the coronation rippled through London's economy, from the grand hotels hosting international dignitaries to the small cafes serving tea to tired spectators. As Buckingham Palace came into view, its facade decorated with ceremonial banners and flowing bunting, William felt the full weight of coming home as a transformed man. This building had been his workplace and occasional residence as a prince, but now it would become the center of his reign, the place from which he would rule and serve his people. Every room would take on new significance. Every meeting would carry greater weight. Every decision would echo through the Commonwealth and beyond. The palace staff had lined the courtyard in their finest uniforms, understanding that they were welcoming not just their employer, but their sovereign. The household that had served the royal family for years now served the crown itself, their roles elevated along with William's status. From the most senior courtiers to the newest kitchen assistants, everyone felt the transformation that had occurred during the morning's ceremony. The famous balcony of Buckingham Palace awaited them, the stage from which the royal family would make their first public appearance as the new monarchs. This balcony had witnessed countless historic moments, from wartime celebrations to royal weddings, and now it would host the first public greeting between the newly crowned king and his subjects. The crowds in front of the palace had been gathering. Since before dawn, their patience rewarded now as they prepared to witness the traditional balcony appearance. The Victoria Memorial provided an elevated platform for many spectators, while others pressed against the palace gates, hoping for the closest possible view of their new king and queen. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was electric with controlled excitement. Household staff moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for the balcony appearance while managing the countless logistical details that accompanied such a momentous day. The royal children were checked once more for any signs of fatigue or distress, their young faces showing the strain of the morning's lengthy ceremony, but also the excitement of being part of something extraordinary. The moment of the balcony appearance approached, and with it, the first opportunity for the newly crowned king to address his people directly. The speech he would give had been crafted carefully, balancing tradition with modernity, acknowledging the weight of history while looking forward to the future. Every word had been considered, every phrase polished, understanding that these first remarks as king would be analyzed and remembered for generations. The palace doors opened onto the balcony, and the roar from the crowd below was deafening. Thousands of voices joined together in a celebration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The sound was not just noise, but pure emotion made audible, the expression of a nation's joy and hope concentrated into a single moment of overwhelming human connection. William stepped forward, still wearing the St. Edward's crown despite its considerable weight, understanding that the people needed to see their king in full regalia. The sight of him crowned and invested with all the symbols of monarchy created a visual connection to centuries of British history, a living link between past and future that satisfied something deep in the national consciousness. Catherine joined him, her own crown catching the afternoon light and creating sparkles that seemed to dance across the crowd below. The children followed, their presence adding a human element to the regal display, reminding everyone that beneath the crowns and ceremony was a family that would grow and change in the public eye. The king raised his hand, and gradually the crowd, quieted, expectant, and ready to hear the first words from their newly crowned sovereign. The silence that fell over the crowd was remarkable in its completeness, thousands of people holding their breath as one, waiting for their new king to speak his first words from the balcony of Buckingham Palace. William looked out over the sea of faces, each one representing a life that would be touched by his reign, a citizen whose hopes and dreams had become part of his sacred responsibility. The weight of the St. Edward's crown seemed lighter now, as if the ceremony had helped him grow into its dimensions. "My people," William began, his voice carrying clearly through the microphones that would broadcast his words around the world. The simple phrase contained multitudes, acknowledging the profound relationship that had been formalized that morning in Westminster Abbey. These were no longer just subjects of the crown, but his people. Individuals whose welfare had become the central purpose of his life. Today marks not just the beginning of my reign, but the continuation of a promise that has been kept for over 1,000 years. The promise to serve, to protect, and to dedicate every breath to the welfare of this great nation and the Commonwealth that extends across the globe. His words carried the gravity of ancient oaths, combined with the accessibility of modern communication, bridging the gap between medieval ceremony and contemporary reality. Catherine stood beside him, her presence a reminder that the monarchy had evolved to embrace partnership and shared responsibility. Her own journey from commoner to queen consort represented the modern face of the institution, proof that the crown could adapt while maintaining its essential character. The children flanked their parents, living symbols of the monarchy's future, and the continuity that would extend beyond any single reign. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming, a roar of approval that seemed to lift the very palace into the air. Flags waved with renewed vigor, and the sound of thousands of people cheering created a wall of celebration that rolled across London and beyond. Television cameras captured every moment, broadcasting the scene to billions of viewers who were sharing in this historic moment from every corner of the earth. I have been privileged to witness the strength and resilience of our people through times of challenge and celebration, William continued when the cheering subsided. I have seen the compassion that defines our character, the innovation that drives our progress, and the unity that makes us stronger than the sum of our parts. As your king, I pledge to honor these qualities and to serve them with every fiber of my being. His words reflected not just the formal language of monarchy, but the personal understanding he had gained through years of public service before assuming the throne. His work with charities, his military service, his involvement in environmental causes had given him insights into the real challenges facing his people, and his speech reflected that grounded understanding of contemporary Britain. The international dimension of his role was not forgotten as he addressed the Commonwealth nations whose representatives had traveled thousands of miles to witness the coronation. To our friends and partners across the Commonwealth, I renew the bonds of friendship and cooperation that have sustained us through generations. Though we are separated by oceans, we are united by shared values, common history, and mutual respect that transcends any distance. The mention of the Commonwealth brought fresh cheers from sections of the crowd where visitors from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other member nations had gathered. Their presence at the coronation represented more than diplomatic courtesy. It embodied the living reality of relationships that had evolved from empire to partnership, from dominion to friendship. As William spoke, the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting golden light across the palace facade and the assembled multitude. The timing seemed perfect, as if nature itself was blessing the coronation with the kind of illumination that photographers and historians dream of capturing. The light caught the jewels in both crowns, creating prismatic displays that added magical elements to an already extraordinary scene. "The crown I wear today does not make me your superior," William declared, his voice growing stronger with each word. "It makes me your servant, bound by sacred oath to place your welfare above my own comfort, your needs above my desires, your future above my present. This is not a burden but a privilege, not a sacrifice but an honor that I accept with humility and determination." Catherine felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened to her husband articulate the philosophy that would guide their reign. These were not just public pronouncements, but private convictions they had discussed in quiet moments, values they had determined to uphold regardless of the personal cost. The crown had not changed William's character, but had given him a platform to express the principles that had always guided him. The children listened with the mixture of understanding and bewilderment that characterized their age, grasping some of the significance while being overwhelmed by other aspects of the moment. George paid closest attention, his position as heir apparent making every royal occasion a learning experience for his own future. Charlotte and Louis found their own ways to participate, waving to the crowd with the natural charm that had already made them beloved public figures. "We face challenges that would have been unimaginable to previous generations," William continued, acknowledging the contemporary issues that would define his reign. Climate change, technological transformation, social inequality, and global uncertainty require leadership that is both rooted in tradition and responsive to change. I pledge to provide that leadership, guided by the wisdom of the past, but not imprisoned by it. The speech was reaching its conclusion, but the emotional impact was growing stronger rather than diminishing. Every word seemed to resonate with the crowd, creating connections between monarch and people that went beyond the formal relationship defined by constitutional law. This was a human moment within a ceremonial framework, a genuine connection between a man and his nation at the moment of his greatest transformation. Today we celebrate not just a coronation, but a covenant, William declared as his speech built toward its climax. A covenant between crown and people, between tradition and progress, between the Britain we have inherited and the Britain we will create together. I cannot fulfill this covenant alone, but with your support, your patience, and your partnership, we can build a future worthy of our highest aspirations. The final words of the speech triggered the most overwhelming response yet from the assembled crowd. The cheering seemed to go on forever, wave after wave of sound rolling across the palace courtyard and echoing through the streets of London. People hugged strangers, children laughed with delight, and elderly spectators wiped tears from their eyes as they witnessed history in the making. As the noise gradually subsided, William raised his hand once more, not to speak, but simply to acknowledge the extraordinary moment they were all sharing. The gesture was simple but profound, a recognition that this was not just his moment but theirs, not just his coronation but their celebration of everything the monarchy represented in their national life. The family remained on the balcony for several more minutes, waving and acknowledging different sections of the crowd, ensuring that as many people as possible felt personally recognized by their new king and queen. The children's natural enthusiasm added warmth to the formal occasion, their genuine delight in the celebration infectious even from a distance. As they finally withdrew from the balcony, the crowd began its gradual dispersal, but the energy of the day would linger in memory long after the last spectator had departed for home. This had been more than a ceremonial occasion. It had been a moment of national unity, a celebration of continuity and change, a bridge between the monarchy's ancient past and its uncertain but promising future. Inside the palace, the newly crowned king and queen began the process of adjusting to their transformed lives, knowing that tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges, and new opportunities to serve the people who had celebrated with such joy outside their windows. The coronation was complete, but the reign had only just begun.